Hey, what's going on everyone? Welcome back to the biggest Fire Emblem tier list you've probably ever seen. We're still doing the Arcaneus special, so today we're going to be discussing some Fe3 and probably some Fe11 as well. So Mystery of the Emblem and Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon, the remake of the original Shadow Dragon Blade of Light. Now, in case you don't know how this works, which could be because you have been absent for a while, I have been absent for a while, both of those might be true. That does works is this is a series of videos that goes on for quite a while, so put this on in the background and chill and do something else. I talk about Fire Emblem characters that my patrons submit to me, put them on a big tier list. Right now the games are separated, but eventually they'll probably be merged into one big one if I can ever find a way to do it. But it's mostly just an excuse for me to talk about units, talk about my experiences with them, and how good they are compared to each other. That's all it is. It's not really a recommendation guide. It's not like you have to use the S tiers, the A plus tiers if you have to use the characters, but this is just how good I think they are compared to each other. And that's just a fun little discussion to have. And it's just a way to thank my Patreons for all their support for me to be able to make videos for free for you guys. So as I said, we're going over Fe3. Both books, kind of a merge kind of thing. Like this list represents both Book 1 and Book 2 ratings combined into one. And then we have Shadow Dragon coming up as well. So before we dive straight into it, I need to talk a little bit about my experience with Fe3. It's one of the reasons why it's been a little bit since I posted the Fe1 video. I actually want to replay Fe3, and I decided to replay Book 2 because I think it's the more enjoyable one, especially because I've already played the maps of Book 1 so many times between Shadow Dragon and Fe1. Boo has been playing some Fe1 or some Fe3 Book 1 though, and telling me how good her Merrick is, so I guess that is my experience with Book 1 that's recent. But mostly I have been playing Book 2 because I think it's a very fascinating game, and kind of mixed opinions on it right now. I actually think the story of Book 2 is really good. I remember the first time playing it, I was like, oh my god, there's a whole new part about Marth, and like it's good, and the music is so good, and the maps are... They really play like a sequel. They really play like it's like, okay, you've played Book 1, now try Book 2, and we're just gonna dive straight into it. No tutorials or anything, just play and check out this sweet map design we've made for you, because the Fe3 map design overall is really, really solid. With some exceptions, of course, and some stinkers, but it just really plays like the guy making it had faith in you being able to Fire Emblem your way around. Don't bother with small tutorial maps, just go straight in and see if you can beat these challenges that we throw at you. I played a bit of Fe3 Book 2 with animations off, and I found it really hard to keep track of how well everyone was doing in battle, as you could probably see by the footage in the bottom right, because I've been recording all of it. I got to about chapter 5 as we're speaking right now, so it's roughly what my ratings are based on. If I find later on that I need to adjust anyone, I will. So it was really hard to keep track of everything because the game doesn't even really show level ups that you get, or in detail doesn't really show how much HP you take. But the animation that I play, if I had the animations on at the beginning, I ended up... It just took forever to get through anything. It's almost as clunky as the NES version. So I was kind of like, wait, how did I enjoy this again? Around like chapter 4 or 5, I figured out I could just leave on the animations, but then just speed up the emulator. Not worry about the sound at all, just put on some different music in the background, maybe some lo-fi music, you know, just hint hint. And that made it a lot better. But it took a while to find my footing in these games, so to speak. But overall, I really think the graphics are very charming, especially for its time. And with some speeding up, it actually plays fine. That does mean if you're playing on original hardware, it's kind of slow and clunky, or very hard to keep track of and kind of slow still. But that's my opinion on Fe3. It's a charming game, and probably the least played Fire Emblem in the West, because it's not available in English. And there are superior versions around, like the remakes, or if you really want to go ultra nostalgia, you can play Fe1 instead, I guess. But those are my thoughts. Now for the metagame, there's a couple things I want to say on Fe3 compared to Book 1 especially. I think one of the biggest changes for comparing Fe3 characters to Fe1 characters, like straight up comparing someone like, I don't know, Fe3 Kane to Fe1 Kane, I think the first big difference is that Fe3 has dismounting, so that means they have the option to dismount. They lose the ability to use swords while mounted. They can use them while dismounted, but then you have less movement for the next turn. And it's not like in Three Houses, where you can like mount and dismount freely without losing your turn. You actually have to do it, and you're committed for the next turn. So you lose some mobility. And indoor maps, you're forced to dismount, which is also kind of annoying for them. It's not the end of the world, because swords are generally better than lances, but at the same time, you can no longer use your more powerful weapons, and you have less mobility. So I think that loses out. And I think especially in Book 2, this really hurts the paladins in particular. I think there's very poor return on training a paladin up in Book 2, because the early game, you have a couple maps that are pretty rough on terrain. You have like a map with a bunch of desert and mountains in the Siryu Ogmar chapter. You have a forest chapter in chapter 2 with just all forests. It's like the spirit forest in there. You have 2 desert chapters in the whole game, Kadeen and then the Alnri's Way. And there's not a lot of return on like the high movement of paladins, because a lot of the time they'll be inhabited by terrain or they'll just be dismounted, because there's also, I'd say, like 4 or 5 maps where you're dismounted. So overall, I'm not going to give someone like Kayn the edge over someone like Navarre just because they're mounted. Like their combat comparisons matter more than before. This is much different from a game like Fe4, for example, where, you know, being mounted is everything. Like if you're not mounted, you could probably not ever get to combat in an efficient context. With that in mind, there's probably going to be some adjustments I will do along the way, but first we should probably dive into the actual units that we're playing with. So I'm going to be thanking my patrons here again, if you'll excuse me, but you should, because, you know, my patrons deserve all the thanks they get. Fe3 removed some characters that were in book 1, so we won't be rating those. Also, some of them have been rated already because they've been submitted specifically in previous episodes. So if I miss out on thanking you for your character, that's because they're not in this particular tier list, but they might pop up later. So in this episode, we'll be going over Barst, who's already been rated, for example. So let's skip him over. Break my own promise there. So Mathis was submitted by Scott. Thank you very much. Setgar was submitted by Patreon Potato. Navarre has been submitted by Pyro Spriter. Kayn was submitted by Giant Corkscrew. Abel was submitted by Leather Shield Merc. And then we have Board submitted by Lucas, who's only in book 1, just letting you know in advance. He's not in book 2, I know. Linde was submitted by Boots42. So was Bantu, for example, but Bantu's already on here. Tiki also already submitted. What's the other next one we got? Linde. Harden submitted by Jonathan. Est submitted by Daniel. Arkholt submitted Castor and Ryan. And then let's see, this should be Tomas, who was submitted by Liberty Ernie. Pipler submitted Rat Queds. Lawrence was submitted by Hugo. Wolf was submitted by Furon. Cetetic submitted Wendell, who's over here. And then we have Minerva submitted by Zelda. Where's Minerva at? Oh, Minerva's already been rated, that's right. We got Samson submitted by Zelda. And Sirius was submitted by Giant Corkscrew as well. And Shinma was submitted by... Where's he at? Curaçao. So there you go. Those are the characters we have for today. I plan to do Shadow Dragon unless my video goes really long. So if I get to Shadow Dragon, I'll go over those characters. But as I speak right now, I have no idea how long this is going to be. I'm trying to make them like an hour, maybe an hour and a little bit max. So let's go over the characters and try to see how good they are. So Mathis is very similar to how he is in Fe1, both in book 1 and book 2. I feel like he joins relatively early, so there's time to train him up. But as I said, the Cavalier class is not a free pass to a higher tier ranking in this one. I think he's more viable in book 1 overall, but still worse than the first Cavaliers. I'm going to check out his book 1 at base just to make sure, because I know there was a game where he's like actually semi-viable. But I might be confusing him with like Rocher, for example, who is more viable overall. Right now, looking at his stats, his bases especially, they don't look particularly impressive. I mean, that said, I'm comparing him to like Abel, for example. I guess he doesn't stack up super terribly, but there's no real reason to use him. It's just, this is basically base level Abel, but he joins in chapter like 4 instead, which is not super impressive. So yeah, can't say I'm super impressed by this guy. I'm trying to think. Yeah, book 2 Mathis. He does have reasonable defense at base, like 9 is pretty good. I'll just let you know I killed him in my run, like he just ran into me and died. So I couldn't really try him out very much, but I wouldn't really have been very inclined to. I guess it helps that his promotion bonus sets his HP to the minimum. I guess it doesn't help here. No, never mind, I misread the stats. Yeah, just he doesn't seem all that good, and then Paladin's kind of bad. I'm gonna put him like around level like Barsts and stuff. I do think it's worse than Bantu, because I think Bantu's actually decent in Fe3 Book 2. Like the way transformation works and his stats are actually pretty good. Aaron is obviously really good in Book 2, but not very good in Book 1. And Julian is just chess utility. I do think it's worse than all these individually, so I think it's fair to put him here. But I know I might be corrected on some of these, because Fe3, not the game I'm the most familiar with, but I think I have a sort of a grasp on how the meta works. Next we have Setgar. Only exists in book 1. Unlike in Fe12, he's not recruitable in book 2. He appears as like a boss kind of guy, but you never really have to fight him. So I'm not going to count that in the rating. It's just about the book 1 Setgar, and he's basically as bad as Wolf is, which I think is about like D tier is probably fair for him. I think in FE1 there was some merit to deploying a guy like Setgar or Wolf or Violent or whoever to help with the convoy, but in FE3 it's a lot smoother. I actually noticed when I'm playing Book 2 that you can actually get the supply things from Marth. I never noticed that was there, but apparently you can supply from him and just use your items that way, just like in FE11. I never noticed that before. But I think Setgar in Book 1 is like, I don't know if I'd call him better or worse than Ubello. The other funny thing is, sure, he's on a horse, but in indoor maps that doesn't matter. He actually dismounts to Hunter, and he loses like 2 defense from it, which I think is pretty funny. He's just rubbing salt in the wound. I guess I put him like around here, like better than Book 2 Ubello, I guess, but it doesn't make much of a difference. I actually think Ubello is like interesting in the fact that he can become a class that I think is very good, which is Bishop, which is why I also want to move Elrin up, but I might get to that later. Let's just do it now while I'm talking about it. So I think Elrin is actually like up here. I realized he's actually like almost as good as Merrick is. In fact, I kind of want to move him to the same tier as Merrick. They're basically the same unit. They have like almost identical base stats. He is Merrick at home in the sense that his bases are worse all around, but he gets like a worse promotion bonus and like a little worse growths. But the Bishop class is so good. Particularly what I like about Elrond is he has like 12 base weapon level, and almost every staff in the game is lower than that. So if you promote the Bishop, you can use almost every staff you want to. And he also has like 70% weapon level growth, so he can get to any weapon level and be pretty good at that. So I'm actually going to rate him over Ogma. I think once Ogma joins, he's overall less useful than Elrond. I can see Ogma being useful for like enemy phasing enemies because he's less fragile, but I can also see Elrond get to a point where he can sort of enemy phase his way through the game. Of course, Elrond does not have Excalibur while Merrick does, so it still makes Merrick more useful. So maybe it should be more like this. But overall, I think it's fine to put Elrond like quite a bit higher than I put him before. Okay, Navarre is, I think, basically the same as Ogma, taking both books into account. If you think about book 1, he joins a little later with like slightly different stats. I'm going to compare them for myself real quick again, just to make sure. Book 1 Ogma, book 1 Navarre. What are the biggest differences between these two? I think they're going to end up in the same tier, just saying. Okay, Navarre actually has worse bases in book 1, even though he joins later at a higher level. He has 3 less HP, 1 less attack, 2 less skill, 1 less speed. And everything else is pretty much the same. I guess he has 5 more luck, which I don't think matters a whole lot in book 2. Better growth all around though, particularly speed is like 20% higher. I think that's enough to put him like in the same tier at the very least. The hero class is really, really good. One character I want to highlight real quick is, one part of him at least, is book 2 Navarre. Because in that game, he joins in that chapter with Fina, so quite a way in, roughly to the point where you kind of want to be a flyer, but I still think Navarre was pretty viable. I'm pretty sure I used him in book 2, one of my first playthroughs. He has 16 base skill and speed, and in this game I think everything caps at 20. And his promotion bonuses give him 2 in each. And this is also a game where XP gain doesn't deplete when promoting. So if you get Navarre to promotion somewhat quickly, he's going to cap both of those stats, which, I mean, I don't put a lot of value in capping stats, like, period. But I think it's pretty funny that he's just that fast. It's like a 50% growth in both strength and speed. So both of those are pretty good. So I think for a combat unit, if you take into account that the most units that are mounted are like on the ground and probably worse at mobility than him in some chapters, I think he does quite fine. I think he holds up quite fine. So I'm gonna put him like where an Ogma is. I'm not sure which one is better overall. I would say Ogma has the edge in book 1, if by a slight bit. Book 2 Ogma is also pretty good. Like his bases there work pretty well, and he has like a pretty good time in his joining chapter getting experience. His growths are a fair bit worse. And his bases aren't even that impressive compared to Navarre, but he's just doing a fair bit before that, so he's like a lot of chance to get XP. I'm not sure which one I would value higher overall, so I'm going to leave him like this. I actually really like Navarre's long-term prospects, so putting him in the same tier seems fair. Alright, Kane and Abel, they are very similar in book 1, but they're not in book 2 in my opinion, so they're actually going to be a bit apart, I think. So in book 1, obviously they both joined very early on. You could just train him from the ground up and you have a good paladin. And I think in book 1, that's probably worth overall, like to at least have one of them promoted and ready, just to have a high mobility unit in most places. Of course, you do lose out on them in dismounted areas, like indoor areas. But overall, I think they're fine. Book 2, like I said, I don't think caps are that good. And they have like wildly different joining situations. So Kane joins at a point in the game where you're almost going into a portion of the game where there's no real advantage to being mounted. He joins in the bridge chapter, where to be fair, it's a good chapter for him, and he's like level 8, so it's easy to get into promotion if you want him to. Then you get to the desert chapter, and then you get another desert chapter soon after that. You get like an indoor chapter in between. From there, you get like another indoor chapter, the Ice Dragon one. You have like a chapter with a bunch of rivers that you can't really cross with Kane unless you go all the way around, so he's kind of limited in where he goes. And there's got a couple more chapters about that where I just don't think Kane is like optimal deployment or really good or anything. But he can still work out all right. It's not a terrible unit or anything, except for like maybe the desert chapters, like moving like 2 or 3 tiles at once is not great for that. Then you get to a portion of the game where it's probably fine, and the worst thing that's left for him is probably chapter 20 of book 2, where he just doesn't have the ability to be on a mount, but other than that, he's probably fine. Abel, I mean, he faces most of those same challenges late game, but he skips the chapters where Kane gets like dismounted. The one thing I don't really like about Abel in book 2 is that his stats don't look very good to me on paper. I haven't been able to try him out in practice. I'm looking at him right now as a, he's a level 1 paladin with... The stats are okay, I guess. He's got 13 attack, 15 speed. I'm not entirely sure how it stacks up against enemies right now, but from my memory, at least in FE12, he doesn't look very good compared to your other units. He might be looking better in FE3 Book 2, where enemy stats might be a bit lower, or the map design might be a bit more friendly towards units that are just joining. FE12 is notorious for having a lot of pre-promotes that join and don't really have a whole lot to contribute combat-wise. Growths are completely the same between Book 1 and Book 2. I think they just had one set of characters with regards to growth, so they can change them between books. So they're easy to remember. Abel does have good growths, and he does gain XP as fast as anyone else because they just you just gain the XP that an enemy is worth, period. So like thieves are like worth 30 or 40, and most enemies are worth like 30 or 40 depending on whether promoted or not. So growing speed is not a big problem, but I question how much he can really make use of his growth stat late into the game. I think if you have been using like shards to train like certain units, they'll probably be a lot better than Abel. It won't be worth a whole lot. And I don't know if you have like, if it's worth deploying him over like utility units like staff units or something. If you have like enough deployment stats to justify him. So for book 1, I think they're both roughly A- or B+ is where I put them. Book 2, I'd say Kane is like B-. Like I would probably call him like better than Luke and Cecil, for sure. Like I'd honestly even move these 2 down because of the advantages that I just named to not being a paladin. There should be one more cav. Oh, it's Rhodey. I don't think I rated him yet. No, Rhodey's not on the list yet. Okay, I'm pretty sure these go in C actually. I think Kane's a little bit better because you don't have to spend time training them in the early game. I think training units like Rhodey and Cecil and Luke early on is actually a detriment. So you'd rather feed kills to Marth and other good units like Katria. Training them is a bit of a pain in the butt, so they're not really helping you that much in the early game. So the availability doesn't really help them. I think Kane is like roughly here overall. Well, this is like his book 2 rating. In book 1, he's like A-, like I said, so maybe he should be like more here. And then Abel, I think it's a bit worse because I think Kane does contribute in the chapters he's in, whereas Abel does not. I'm not sure how good Abel's in the late game compared to your peers, so I'd say overall like B- is probably a fair rating for him. I do think he's less useful than Zane. I think Zane is pretty good, so I'm gonna go with this for now. It might be like blasphemy in some way or another, but just let me know in the comment section. I'll adjust for next time. All right, so next we get to Board, and Board is not in book 2 because Kaga just kind of cut out all the axe users. He said, no, we're done with you. And another thing that makes him a bit worse in FE3, besides the fact that he doesn't exist in book 1, or doesn't exist in book 2, is that axes got even worse somehow, I think, because in book 1 at least, you have like the hammer and you have the generic axe. Like there's an axe that's just called axe. In FE1, that's sort of okay for his speed. Like doesn't weigh him down all the way to 0, but there's no such thing for him in book 1, so I think it's worse than Barst, and honestly I could put him like below Draug as well. I think Draug has his uses in the early game of FE3 book 1, and FE3 book 2 as well, actually, come to think of it. There's some points where you like choke the points that he can do, whereas Board doesn't really have anything great to do, so I'm sorry to say that he goes in E tier. I'm not sure if there's going to be an F tier at all, because I haven't really found any characters bad enough in both books to put them here. I also haven't really found any S tiers, because the characters that are really, really good in one game, like Pala in book 2, for example, haven't really been good enough to put them there overall because of book 1, for example. Maybe what I'll end up doing in the end is like put Marth, Minerva, Jagan, and friends like up in the S tier, move everyone up a bit. But that'll be something to do when the tier list is like done. Right now I've got a bit too many characters left to rate to do that right now. So now we have Linde, who is decent in both if you want to train her up. She's very different in book 1 and book 2 though. In book 1 she joins like halfway through the game, really underleveled, and this game is not very friendly to underleveled units because the XP doesn't curve at all. There's no gaining more XP when you're underleveled. It's just, okay, you kill an enemy and you get as much XP as that enemy's worth. So Linde grows as fast as your overleveled level 20, level 20 promoted level 10, I don't know, Sida or Abel or Kane or whatever. So that's not really very helpful for her. But in book 2 I've been enjoying using her. She does require a lot of care because she's very fragile, low HP, low defense, and not too much attack speed either. She does have access to Nosferatu at base, which I think is either like female only or only she can use it, but it's pretty exclusive to her if I remember. Nosferatu... Yeah, so it's ladies only. So she's like the only female mage in like the whole game until maybe the very end. There might be someone. I guess promoted bishops, promoted clerics can use them. That's about it though. So it's pretty much exclusive to her. She also has Aura, which I remember being close to one-shotting, but not quite doing it. But it's still a pretty good tome to have because you can finish off a slightly weakened enemy. It only weighs 6 in FE3, which is surprisingly low. Like it weighs less than Nosferatu, which weighs 10. So if you want to double someone and maybe do a lot of damage, you can probably use Nosferatu. Let me see. Her base speed is 8, so she has like 2 attack speed, which is enough to double like maybe some knights and some like really low end, like ballistas or something. Her speed growth is actually 60%, which is really stupid. So she's actually very strong. One thing I've noticed about the mages, I think it's true for like Merrick as well, is their attack growth is very low. I think in FE1, mages, they do damage based on a tome might and that's it. They don't really have a strength stat or a magic stat to rely on. And FE3 changed that. I think Garen did that too, where your tome might actually gets added to your attack power, just like it does in later games. And that changes the game a bit, but fortunately, or unfortunately for Linde, she only has like a 2 base attack and then a 20% attack growth, so it doesn't grow very fast. And the same goes for Merrick, I believe. Book 2 Merrick, let me just double check that. Yeah, so like 20% attack growth is not a whole lot, but it will go up eventually. You get like shards to boost it, so it's not like our magic is stuck at base for the entire game, but it will take a while. But that's why having Aura is so good, because it gives you so much might that you can just kind of ignore your own strength stat and its issues and just become really, really strong. So for that reason, I think it's fair to put Linde somewhere where you're like trainable, but it takes a bit. I just have really fond memories of Linde in late game being able to use like the Star Sphere as well as the Nosferatu tome to just stay alive. And then Star Sphere just prevents weapon uses from going down in FE3 in both books, so being able to just drain enemy HP without ever running out of Nosferatu uses, kind of like an Awakening, is pretty good. That is only a limited part of the game because the Star Sphere, you don't have it forever, obviously it's only a couple chapters, but it felt really empowering to do so. So that's kind of what I have in mind when I think of Linde in the late game. You can still use Nosferatu even if you're not like low on users. I think you also get like 2 or 3 books of it, so you can probably use it in situations where you really need it. So I think it's fair to put her at least in C for book 2. And honestly a little bit higher for book 2, but a little lower for book 1. So C, maybe B- would be fair for her. I would put her over Tiki, I think. But again, I'm mostly colored by the book 2 impression I got of her, which is pretty good. Book 1, she might be too garbage. Although I think there's still a place for Aura Chip sometimes in book 1. Next up is Harden, who of course is only available in book 1. So we're judging based on that. Basically a copy of Abel or Kane, but joins a bit later. I'm pretty sure their bases are fairly similar, except Harden looks like he's been trained. I'm going to double check if there's anything that stands out. I do know he has the weapon level to use the Silver Lance, for example. But yeah, his bases look pretty good in this game too. I think they're pretty similar to his book 1 bases. There's not or like his book FE1 bases. It's so confusing with like all these remakes and FE1 and book 1 and all that stuff. So forgive my my mistakes there. But yeah, if you compare it to like base Abel, for example, Harden has +3 attack and +1 speed over Abel, and then like +1 defense. So it's like if you level up Abel a little bit, he does start closer to promotion, so it takes less XP investment overall to make him good. So I think it's fair to put him at least as high as Abel and Kane for their book 1 performances. I think not existing for book 2 might have honestly be a blessing in disguise. I'm gonna put him like around here somewhere. It probably helps him that he's not around in book 2 overall, because cats are just worse there overall. So I would put him like around here somewhere, I think. Maybe even above the mages. Yeah, I'm gonna put him around here. That seems fair to me. Alright, Next up on the list is S, who I've never been a big fan of. So S is the quintessential underleveled unit, and as I said before, underleveled units in Fe3 don't really do very well. S also doesn't have a whole lot of ability, so even if she were to become good, there's a limited amount of chapters where she can really help you be good. That said, obviously, if you do train her, she will turn out fantastic for the last couple chapters. I'm going to check out to see what her growths are exactly, because I know there was like one game where her growths are not very good. They are really good in this game though. 70 strength, 70 speed, and then 60 luck, 70 weapon level, 70 skill. Just pretty good overall. Her base is obviously trash and gonna need a lot of help to get anywhere. She does have a base weapon level of 11, so she could probably use like a silver lance at the very least for some higher might. But her base strength, for example, is 6 in both games. In fact, looking at it, I think her bases are the same in both games. That's kind of funny that they did that, but it makes sense because she joins at like a similar time too. So you could almost say she's the exact same unit in both games. Obviously the context is a little different because the maps are different, and I think the enemies in Book 2 are overall stronger. So theoretically, you think that the enemies in Book 2 are being stronger makes her a bit worse in that book, relatively speaking. I don't know, you make up your mind. Anyway, I think S is like a D tier unit, but like a high one. Like I'd rather train S than deal with Mathis all game, right? So that makes S the best D tier, I think. That's probably the best way to go about it. All right, next on the list we have Castor, or as he used to be known, Kashim, both for Book 1 and in Book 2, and not too different between the two. I think the biggest interesting thing about Castor is what happens between Fe1 and Fe3. In Fe1 he kind of promotes, but he's in a Hunter class, which is better than Archer, but worse than Sniper, so he ends up as an awkward in-between when it comes to movement, especially compared to someone like Gordon or like Ryan, who we'll discuss in a little bit. So overall, I like Hunters better than Archers, obviously, and if you're just using them for early game utility and you're never promoting them to Sniper, then someone like Castor is always going to be better than an early game Archer. But in Fe3, Hunters can promote to Horseman, but whenever you have to go indoors, you have to dismount back to Hunter. And like I said, with Setguard, they lose some defense, and defense is not the biggest deal for bow units, but it does make them a bit worse. But the biggest hurt is obviously the loss of mobility. So for Castor, I think I used him in my very first Book 2 run, I'm fairly sure. I think the main thing I noticed about him is his offense was quite good. It helps his first impression that he comes with a killer bow, kind of like Jamka and Fe4. You just kind of start associating their starting inventory with their actual utility. And so he was doing pretty good early on. One thing I know about Castor is he cannot use Parthia that easily. It takes some scrolls. Let me check exactly how far away he is, but I think it takes a while. Book 1 Castor, Book 2 Castor. So they both start with, so one starts with 6 weapon level, the other one starts with 8. Book 2 starts with 8. And then you got the Parthia, which I think like Parthia like level 17? Weapon level 12 actually, okay. So when he promotes, he doesn't gain any weapon level as far as I can tell. So he needs to go from 6 or 8 to 12, which is possible I guess, but his growth is only 20%, so it'll probably take the manual to get there, kind of like I mentioned with Tomas last episode. Probably a worthwhile investment if it gets him there, but I think the manual only increases by like 4 or 5. Let me double check that real quick. What's this thing called? Scroll. Does it even exist in this game actually? Let me check that, because I think that's a pretty big deal for him. I mean, Parthia is not the only thing that matters, of course, but it is a pretty big pile of offense that you don't really get when using bows in general. They're nice against flyers, of course, but not like you need them. Okay, they do exist. They were called manual here. They do increase by 5. So if you can spare him the manual, then you can probably make him use Parthia. Other than that, I don't think there's a whole lot of places for bows. Unfortunately, Castor joins like right after you get that chapter with all the Draco Knights, chapter 3. There's still chapter 5 to consider, where you also have to fight a couple Draco Knights, but the hard part about Draco Knights is you have to bait them individually for them to be killed by Castor. And I think it's easier to do in chapter 3 than it is in chapter 5, although you can do it in chapter 5, there's a bit more time pressure there. There's only one manual in Book 1, which is in the chest. And Book 2, I don't know if it's there at all. Oh, there is one. There's one on the Flying Dragon in chapter 11, which is a little bit after you get the Parthia, so you could get him there. Let's get like 1 or 2 procs along the way, and you should be able to get there. Okay. And then there's like quite a few flying enemies in Book 2, I suppose, like the flying dragons in the desert, like I just mentioned. So those help a bit. I don't know if he can double them or even one-arm them. I guess if he has like access to a higher level weapon like the silver bow, which I think you can use at that point in the game. Like if you can almost use the Parthia, you can definitely use the silver bow. Yeah, the weapon level 7, so you can definitely use that at that point. That seems fair. Okay, so he has access to some high weapons, and I assume he can OCO with those. I haven't checked the numbers, but I think he can. And it should be pretty good to go with that regard. But the problem remains, of course, that he's like player phase only, and I think Fe3 overall you can generally classify as an enemy phase game. There are some strong enemies in Book 2, definitely like dragons that you might want to keep some distance from. In that case, the range is helpful. And I think overall caster, as far as a bow user goes, is like decent. The fact that he can promote at all like helps, obviously. So I think he's like, I would say he's better than the early game calves by a bit. I don't know if it's by an entire tier or not. I don't know if I put him in the same level as like Abel. Not super fond of Tiki, as you can tell. Maybe she should move down a bit. I think he's worse than Linde overall. I'm just gonna put him here for right now. Maybe he should be a bit worse though. Next up, we have Ryan, who is only in Fe3 Book 2 out of the games we've discussed so far. He's basically just a copy of Gordon, but worse. I have been trying to train Gordon, actually, and I got to like level 9 before Chapter 5 or so, which is pretty insane. But Gordon starts at a higher level, and I fed him more kills. I'm training him because I actually like snipers for this book, because the sniper just has it just has good class bases, it has good mobility, and I think they overall have better offense. Unfortunately, Gordon's growth are quite bad. Ryan's are a bit better, but not that great either. He has like 5 base attack and then 40 growth, and then 4 base speed and 40 growth. So his stats aren't too impressive. So you just gotta wait for him to turn sniper. But sniper gives him +5 speed and promotion, which is pretty insane. Weapon level goes up to like 10 minimum if it's not there already. He's got like a base of 5, 40% growth, so he might not be there. I think Sniper is decent for the same reason I think Castor's class is kind of decent. But I do think that Ryan starting at level 1 as opposed to Gordon's level 5 is a pretty big detriment to him. You really want to be like promoted level 10, I think, with these two especially. And needing line levels rather than like the 5 that Gordon needs is pretty big. Unleveled units don't get extra XP. They do get some opportunity to get XP from the Draconites and everything. But every Draconite is like only like half a level. So even if you fought 10 Draconites, he'd still only be level 6 or so. So there's still got to be XP from somewhere else. And with only like 5 base attack, and then I don't know how strong bows are, but I think they're not that strong. Like an iron bow is like 6 might or so. So yeah, it's got some trouble. You also, like, the bows are pretty heavy. Like the iron bow weighs 4, so his base attack, like his base attack speed is actually 0. So doubling will not happen for a little bit. So I think Ryan is actually kind of bad. The outcome of like being a sniper eventually is kind of nice though, but I think overall I'd rather turn Ubello than Ryan, honestly. Like, I just like the bishop class almost as much as the sniper class, if not more. But I just don't see Ryan getting very good. And I'm not gonna say, like, because Gordon exists that Ryan is a lot worse. But for like realistic, pragmatic purposes, there's no reason to use Ryan. You never need 2 snipers, right? So I don't think it really hurts his tier ranking very much, but it's just like, why would anyone use him is more of a thing to say here. Then we have Tomas, who doesn't exist in Book 2, I'm pretty sure. He exists in Fe12, but not in Book 2. And I do like him in Fe1 because he's like so close to promoting and everything. But I don't think he has a whole lot to do in Book 2 in comparison. Obviously, the side promotion is pretty good. He's still close to promotion, actually. He's still level 8, and he can still get there, I guess. I'm trying to think, like, what would be the biggest difference between his ranking in Fe1 versus Fe3. And there isn't a whole lot, besides the fact that I guess the other artists are a bit better, so he has like more competition in that sense. The Parthia, I mean, you get it like the same chapter you get him, and its weapon level is 12. I guess you still need to give him the scroll because his weapon level at base is 9, so he's never going to get there unless you give him the scroll. I guess he goes up to 10 when he promotes, if he doesn't grow his weapon level already. I don't know, I could see it. I guess he's like worse than Castor for sure because he doesn't have the availability. And that's about it. I think he looks a bit worse in this one because the Book 2 characters are a bit better overall. I don't think he's much worse in Fe3 than he is in Fe1. But I think he just has more competition from better units in his tier list. Like compared to these units that are overall more impressive, I think he ends up here. Like there's an Fe1. I don't think I think Fe1 is a bigger niche for him. So better than Cecil and Luke, I guess. We'll go with this for now. Rad, I don't really have any big differences between him in Book 1 and in Fe1, and Book 2 he doesn't exist, so I think it just kind of ends up here, below Jog and Barst, or Board. I mean, he's worse than Barst as well, of course, but just no early game utility and not a whole lot to do, other than, you know, funny meme promotion and everything. Like the class itself, like Myrmidon to Sword Fighter, is pretty alright, but this is not worth the pain it is to catch him up. And unleveled units, you know, they don't catch up very fast in this game. So he's going to end up here. Lawrence, another book 1 only units. I don't see a whole lot of value in him. I do think in FE3, let me see, FE3 General, I think the class is a little worse as well because he can't use swords in this game, whereas he can in FE1. Well, I guess you can use lances in this one instead of swords. It's not like you would be able to use both. I think using swords is better than using lances, but it doesn't really make much of a difference because Lawrence is so slow. And I don't think he has a whole lot of utility here. Like, he has no attack speed to speak of because lances are kind of heavy. You can use the slim lance, I guess, but I don't really see a reason to use Lawrence ever. I was gonna like put him in E tier and just be done with it. I don't think there's a whole lot he can do. He does have like 19 base defense, but I don't think it helps him here. Like, if I can't use anything with Bantu, who has like 99 defense if he wanted to have it, I don't think there's a whole lot I can do with Lawrence either. So I'm just gonna put him there and be done with it. Wolf, also book 1 only. Basically the same unit as Setgar as far as I'm concerned. I'm gonna check real quick which one I think is worse. But anything I say about Setgar should probably be true for Wolf. Neither of them playable in book 2. Wolf has 2 more HP, same attack, same skill. Wolf has 1 more speed, which, if anything, I think is the biggest difference. Same defense. 3 more weapon level, actually. I don't know if that makes a big difference. They can both use the steel bow, which I think is like the highest thing they have access to. How far is he from using silver bow? Just out of curiosity. Just stretching for things here. Okay, so Wolf, with 1 weapon level, can use the silver bow, where Setgar is like ways away from it. So that makes Wolf a little better, in my opinion. Like, the silver bow, I mean, you don't get it for a while, but if you like really want to, you know, find the minimal differences between them, then this has got to be it, right? But other than that, like, I mean, I guess if you want me to hear, like, talk about the specifics of, like, the Hunter, dismounted class, and the Horseman, you got to go back to the rating of, I think it was Setgar who had rated first, yeah. So you got to go back to that one. But basically, having to dismount indoors kind of sucks. No more utility like there is in FE1 with the convoy and everything. So just kind of chip bots early game when you have spare deployment slots, and after that you just never use them again because their bases are so horrendous. That's where I put them. Sheena is interesting. She's only in book 2, so there's not a whole lot of unit like that. And her bases are god-awful. She's got 8 base attack at that point in the game. Is pretty trash. Like, only 5 move, which is going to be the big stinker here, because at that point, even if you're like a dismounted mod unit, it's still going to have 6 move, I believe. I need to double check this, but I'm pretty sure she has less mobility than most people, at the very least. So, the thing with Shima is just, you have 17 base defense, which is nice, but I think that's not even enough to negate the majority of the attacks at that point in the game. And her HP base is only 26, so she'll still die somewhat soon, especially if magic is involved or something like that. Her growths are actually insane. They're like S level. She has like 60 HP, 60 attack, 70 skill, 50 speed, 60 weapon level, and 20 defense. I did say that being on level doesn't really help you in this game, but Shima is like promoted, so I think she's actually kind of helped by the XP formula more than hurt. She can still catch up fairly quick despite being promoted. When it comes to levels, if you really wanted her to, like if you wanted to train like a meme unit, she'd be pretty fun to do, especially in conjunction with like, I think at that point you have the Star Sphere. I think you almost get it. Yeah, I think you have to Star Sphere for a little more, so you could do that if you wanted to. Unfortunately, being able to use lances doesn't really help her very much. Like the Javelin just weighs her down to 0 speed. She has 5 to begin with, so it's not a big I'm trying to struggle like something that Shima can do that someone else could not, but I don't really see anything. And the novelty of a female general is of course great, and probably something you should try. Like if you join playing FE3 over and over, this is definitely a unit you want to use sometimes, but I don't really see anything you can do. I think Lawrence is better just because the better bulk in this game. That's like all I can come up with. Shima's really not that very good. Sirius, another book 2 the only unit, and a pretty goddamn good one. Honestly, almost as good as Pala. Gaining XP at his rate should not be legal, and his growths are pretty insane as well, if I recall. Let me just double check them to make sure he's not wrong. I mean, they're not spectacular by FE3 standards, but 50% attack and 40% speed, when his bases are like 11 attack and 13 speed. In chapter, what are we talking about? Like chapter 4 is pretty stupid. I think mine got a little blessed. I think he had like 18 speed by the time I got to chapter 5 or something, which is very stupid. But he's ridiculously strong. I did say training a Paladin is not really worth it in book 2 because the many chapters that are, you know, anti-mounts, but we already have one at base that really makes up for a lot of it, because you don't have to like spend investment into him. He's just good in the chapters you want him to. You can just bench him for the chapters he's not good in, and you would still get a lot of positive utility out of him because he just takes no training whatsoever to be good. He's also like super good in his joining chapter. Like Ogma would not be able to handle all the enemies near Yubello and Yumina alone. So that alone is like a lot of utility that he just gets for free on any playthrough. I guess low luck is kind of a problem, but I don't believe luck gives a lot of crit avoid in this game, if any at all. I'm going to double check that because I know it really hurts him in FE12. Yeah, so the critical evade does exist in this game for luck. So he does get crit every now and then. There's more units with this issue, but it's really notorious on Sirius because his base luck is 1 and he only has a 30% growth. That's like the one weakness besides terrain that he really has. But being able to use lances mounted, pretty sure he uses lances only when mounted, and then swords when dismounted. But they can use both just fine. So he works both indoors and outdoors if you want him to. Obviously, being dismounted kind of sucks still, but it doesn't make him terrible. You also, I think you have to bring him to the final 3 maps if you want to get the good ending, so that's a reason why a lot of people train him. Honestly, it doesn't really matter for me. I would bring an untrained series to final maps too. He wouldn't really be able to do anything special, but it doesn't really change very much how I view him as a unit. But if you train him, it makes it a bit easier because it's a slot you're always going to spend on him. So in that way, that helps him as well. But just super good mobility all around. Good enough stats all around to just be like very bulky. 11 defense and 26 HP. It doesn't sound super impressive, but it takes a lot of physical hits to take Sirius down early on, and that's super helpful. Like easily your best unit behind Pala, and maybe like an early promoted unit or something. But there's no Chris or anything, so that's like another unit that just isn't competing with Sirius right now. Probably the second best unit in this game. Honestly, I would put Sirius in S tier for Book 2 alone. Like his performance is so consistent. Pala's being dragged down by her Book 1 performance, but I think Sirius is easily, if there's an S tier in FE3, I think it's got to be Sirius. And then maybe, I guess if Jagan is only in Book 1, then maybe he should be here as well. I'm not sure about Minerva. She's really good in both books, so maybe she should be up there as well. Marth, I'm not so sure. I feel like this is an okay gap to have, but I'm not entirely sure on it. I definitely think Sirius stands out among all units though. Again, not being in Book 1, and like, imagine if Sirius was like a unit that joined like, let's say around chapter 20 of Book 1, then he'd be worse. Like, he'd be like in B tier or something, or like maybe A tier. So the fact that he's only in Book 2 kind of helps in this regard. I could still separate the Book 1 and Book 2 lists, and I might do it at some point, because I'm not super happy with having to merge them like this. But it makes sense for one game to be on one tier list, so it's kind of weird. Then we have Wendell, who is just super good in both books for his utility. I need to like double check what his weapon levels are like, because I'm not sure which staves he can reasonably use. It looks like he has 10 weapon level in Book 2. Let me check his Book 1 to see if it's any different. I know he can use Ward or Barrier. Looks like his bases are roughly the same. At least weapon level is 10 for both, so that's enough to use most of the things he gets that you get access to at a time. He has like 70% growth, so easily able to get wherever you want. If you need like an Again user at some point, pretty sure you can get it. At least in Book 2, because in Book 2... no, Book 2 he starts at level 7, so he only has 13 levels to grow. 70% weapon level. I think he'll probably get to level 20 if you want him to. And if not, there is always the option of giving him Armor Scroll. Because the reason I hyper on this is because Against Staff, I think, has a 20 weapon level stat. Yeah, and the Against Staff is super, super good. But it takes a long while before you get it. And once you get it, you really want to use it to its full extent. Like, Against Staff makes every one of your other units move again. So you want to make sure Wendell's the last one to move in your turn. And it basically just dances for everyone, which is super, super, super insane. It only has 3 uses. I don't remember if you can hammer in it or not in this game. Yeah, cannot be used on staffs, unfortunately. So you only get as much again as you have, but it's still like, even if you only get 3 the whole game, it's still super overpowered utility to have. And then otherwise you have like Physic and stuff for free. Wendell's is super good in both books. I think he also, not sure about S tier or just like high A+. I would honestly put him here just because the utility he provides is just so free and so nice to have that I'm just going to put him in S tier. I think someone wanted me to put him in S tier for FE1 as well, which I think is fair. So there you go. Now we have an actual S tier. Finally, there is Samson, who is in both books, but he joins kind of too late to have much of an impact in both books. I need to double check what his bases are. And I don't remember exactly how good they are in context, but I just want to see his bases real quick. So they're kind of not impressive for either, in my opinion. He does have like 19 base speed in Book 2, which is pretty insane. He has 17 in Book 1. But considering how late he joins, I guess that's only fair. But I guess the bulk is okay, but not great. It's like series level bulk. Actually, come to think of it, is like in book 2, for example, he has 28 base HP and 11 base defense, and Sirius has 26 HP, 11 defense, so that's kind of funny. But he's doing so late that it's hard to like really rate him. I don't think he's like a super great late pre-promote. He's not like a Goto or anything. He just has like okay attack and everything, and then okay bulk. The class he has is good, don't get me wrong. Like, especially if you're playing like 0% growth, I imagine he's quite competent. But I'm not sure exactly how I'd rate him. I would say like bottom of B- or top of C, because the utility he provides is for free. Like, you would not mind deploying him if you had a spare slot, I think, because he's not super impressive or anything. I'll put him over Tiki. That's like my threshold for okay units. Maybe he's better than that. Maybe he's more like around Abel level of book 2 Abel. I feel like it's better than book 2 Abel, but not better than book 1 Abel. So I want to put him like, yeah, I want to put him here, sure. These two obviously require more training, but I think they also, well, maybe Castle doesn't have a better payoff. I think actually I like the payoff that Samson has, or like the free utility he has, better than the payoff that Castor gives you. So there you have it for book 2. Again, not a game I'm super confident in. I'm gonna play it over the next couple months probably, and see if my opinion changes on anything, and maybe I'll go back and revisit this real quick, do some revisions. And now, let me see. So I've been recording this for about 40-ish minutes, 46. So we can throw in some Shadow Dragon. I'll be right back. I'm gonna set up the Shadow Dragon thing, because it'd be nice to get that done, and then we have like one more episode to do for FE12, which has a lot of units. So I don't want to shove in Shadow Dragon with FE12. So yeah, let's go for some Shadow Dragon. Let's revisit the book 1 maps. Be right back. Alright, so Shadow Dragon. This is a game that I've played quite a few times and somewhat recently too, so I'm kind of looking forward to this one actually. Couple of characters are on here that were not on here before, that were submitted by people that I haven't really mentioned yet, I think. So let me go over those real quick. I mean, Abel, Kane, we already know they were on there, like we reviewed them like 2 times already. But for example, Goto was submitted by Omega. And Beck was submitted by Mani, so thank you to you both. Norn is also new on the list, I think, but she's somewhere else on my sheets. Where's Norn at? Right here, submitted by Danny Doyle, so thank you all so much. Alright, so Kane and Abel in Shadow Dragon, I mean, I wouldn't say they're the same unit. They're much more distinctive than they were before in FE1 or FE3 Book 1. The biggest differences, I mean, I've gone over it before. I'm kind of surprised they haven't been like listed somewhere already. I guess I reviewed them for like CAV tier list or something. So the biggest differences to me are the weapon levels. Kane is focused on swords. He has D swords, E lances, whereas Abel's reversed. This is much better for Abel because Abel can use javelins at base to not take counterattacks. He's closer to using the Rider's Bane, and in general, lances are just a better weapon than swords in a game where weapon triangle exists, unlike in previous games like FE3, FE1, and a lot more enemies have lances and to a lesser extent swords compared to axes. There are a lot of axe users in the early game where Kane's higher sword rank actually comes into play, and he can be quite good at like feeding kills there. The problem for Kane is, of course, that he's always going to take a counterattack, whereas Abel can always attack with a javelin without taking a counterattack. So sometimes the lances still work out better, but Kane definitely has more reliable damage, and is also better for finishing off enemies. The other big difference is Kane has a slight speed disadvantage. I believe it's only 1 point, but this 1 point can make a big difference because hard 5 enemies especially stat creep really hard. The most like notorious example I like to use is that Hunters in like chapter 2 already double Kane, and I think almost around him, unless he like gained a point of HP or defense. Don't get me wrong, Kane grows out of this being doubled and being terrible, completely terrible, in a little bit, so he doesn't have to suffer that badly compared to Abel, but the advantages that Abel has kind of stack over the course of the game and make him better overall. Now, I will say, someone who I know watches watches these tier lists a lot is Felkama, and they did a LTC of Shadow Dragon recently, where they actually made a point of training Kane and showing how good it was, and I was pretty impressed by his contributions. I did see that he was mostly just finishing people off, so it was like half helping and half, you know, for his own gain, but it worked out, and then he was able to promote and turn into Draco Knight and do some like mid-game utility overall. So by Shadow Dragon standards, he did pretty well. Kane is pretty okay, but I still think Abel is better overall. I'm trying to see, I didn't put Harden on here yet, so I don't have him as a vantage point here. I think when you talk like efficiency, like efficient playthroughs, you have to put them over Setgar and Wolf. Of course, I put them up here in B+ to begin with to show that they are good for casual players in the first place. Like, if it was like really about efficiency, I would put them lower. But I think it's worth praising them for how much they trivialize hard 1 or hard 5 or any difficulty, honestly. I don't know about Barst and Wendell. I think they go in like A or A+, honestly. I think that's like a fine spot for them, like A-, A+, probably best for them. I will say I think Abel's better. I don't know if there's anyone who disagrees, but I think Abel's the better one. You could argue Barst is worse. His combat is much better. But he can never become a Draco Knight at a game where Draco Knights are just completely busted. So kind of on the fence on that one. I really like Barst's combat advantage though, and Hero still has like 8 move compared to like Paladin's 10, so he's still pretty well off. I don't know, make up your own mind about that part, I guess. Board, this might be one of the best games for a board. He's still not super good, but there are some things he can do. Most notably, he has the C rank and Axes. The most obvious advantage to this is Hammer, and this is also the game where Forges become available for the Arcanine people. So in FE3, those weren't really a thing at all. Like, they just didn't exist. I know why I keep throwing the word really in there every now and then. But in Shadow Dragon, Forged weapons are one of the best ways to have offense. Not only do you increase your damage output and your reliability by increasing just damage and hit in the first place, but you also consume the weapon while it uses. If you like attack in a single hit and kill them, you do much better than if you double them. Sita's like the best demonstrating user of this because he just outgoes people with a wing spear and ends up not taking a counterattack, and also consumes a wing spear with less because, well, if you only attack once, you only consume one use. Doubling is not really a thing that Board is worried about particularly, of course, but this does give him an out to being a Armor Knight killer by having a Forged Hammer available. I remember using Deros to one-hit KO Armor Knights in Chapter 6, for example, like a Forged Hammer, the can opener, and that worked well, and I don't see why it wouldn't work for Board. It was a very expensive forge, though, and you might not be able to forge the hammer right away. You might prioritize the Wing Spear, the Rider's Bane, and maybe something else. I generally like those two, and then maybe an Iron Bow, but the hammer is a pretty good candidate because Chapter 6 does have a lot of Armor Knights you want to kill, so I don't mind can opening a little bit in Chapter 6. Board himself, his stats are of course still impressive. At least now he has the strength to use axes without getting weighed down to nothing, but he still gets doubled a lot because the speed is still one of the lower ones in the game. But I think he's more useful than Cord, despite Cord having a speed advantage, because Cord, as much as I like the memes about Cord and Dark, at the very least he has no weapon rank. That really sucks about him. That does mean he can like use other classes without losing much, but I think the initial class that Board is in is actually quite good. Now I was gonna put him in like C tier, but come to think of it, maybe he's more of a D tier because I don't think he's that much better than Deros. Deros has D-base axes, Board has C rank axes, but by the time you want to fight Armor Knights, he's probably at C axes already if you're really using Deros full time. And I will also say about Board, I guess C rank axes gives you like a slight hit advantage because just having C rank axes gives you more hit, but it's not so much that I want to put him in C tier over D's. So I'm gonna put him like over Deros by a bit because he's a bit more early game utility, I think, but not a whole lot. Although the sale is pretty funny. But it's worth noting, like real quick, that since Board can reclass into Deros, Deros doesn't really have the advantage of water walking over him. That isn't really a specialty of Deros anymore in that game. So yeah, we're gonna have to deal with a 2-line D tier, I am afraid. Next up is Linde. Now, the great thing about Linde in this one, compared to FE3 Book 1, is of course that she now gains more XP than most people when she attacks something. The bad news is that I think Aura got a lot heavier compared to previous games. I'm going to double check that, just so I make sure that I don't say it wrong. Aura, because Aura weighs 6 in FE3 Book 1. In this game, it weighs absolutely nothing. Okay, cool. Nice. All right, good thing I didn't say that wrong at all. No, not at all. I still don't think she's going to double a whole lot because, especially if you're playing higher difficulty, she's not going to be that fast. Her speed is about the same. Yeah, her speed is the exact same. Of course, she's going to have more because she's not getting weighed down. Actually, she gets weighed down by 1 by Aura, but it's not a big deal. Like, she's not doubling anything. She's going to attack someone from range, chip them. Her magic is not high enough to one-shot anything, not even in this game. She has 2 magic at base, 50% growth though, so it will increase faster, and if you were to raise her, she'd probably become pretty strong. I kind of doubt she will ever be able to double though, because they nerfed her speed growth to 35%, so it's absolutely awful, and there are no real better classes for her in this game. I don't think this is really a game where you want to go like Sword Master Levin Sword. That's more of an FE12 thing, although you know, maybe in theory it's the best way to do damage with Linde. But right now I think she's just a good chip bot for the mid to late game. I do know that like if you have deployment slots for her, it probably is worth deploying her as long as you can keep her safe, just to help your other characters push through enemies faster. It's probably worth it to weaken an enemy with Linde and then finish him off with like a force weapon that couldn't quite OHKO, for example. So that is sort of worth using, and it might honestly be better than a lot of what we're seeing in like C and D tier. I'm trying to think if she's like a C or a D. I want to put her in C. She has no early game utility, but some mid game utility, which is honestly more rare to see. So I guess if I'm, yeah, I'll just say C for now. I could see D though. I don't mind it either way. Then we have Harden, and Harden is basically just put him up here, right? I think whenever I like compare them when I'm playing, I find that Harden usually gets the short end of the stick. But I think objectively you have to say that Harden is better because of a higher base level. I do think that like these two have early game utility that Harden doesn't have, but at the same time Harden doesn't take XP. I don't know if that quite evens out or if one of them is better than the other. Like you might prefer, like if you put a gun to your head, right? Would you prefer not to be able to use Abel or not to be able to use Harden? That's basically the question you gotta ask. And that's a difficult comparison to make. Because in the early game, it feels like you need everyone to contribute and help fight all these like enemies that are just way more powerful than your units. But at the same time, you have some targets for XP distribution that you wouldn't have if you used Harden over Abel and Kayn. But other than that, they're basically the same unit. I like Harden's ability to use the Silver Lance at base. This is not a game where it's easy to use the Silver Lance. Like in Fe3, Abel and Kayn need some level ups in weapon level to get there. And they'll probably get there eventually, but they might not have it when Harden joins. Harden just does it at base. Same for the Rider's Bane, and also gain some extra weapon rank bonuses from that. Like a B rank lance, I think you get +1 might as well as +10 hit from the top of my head. It might be +7 hit. Whereas Abel, he's lucky if he has like C rank lances at chapter 5. He'll probably get there, but it takes some serious work. Kayn, it's going to take him a long time just to get to Rider's Bane, I think. I think Falcoma's run got him there chapter 6 or 7, roughly, with like some intense focusing on it. But yeah, I think this is roughly the right spot for them, like A-. It is very cool in this game that they can promote to Paladin, but then reclass it to Draco Knight. They don't have access to a Pegasus Knight, obviously, because they're guys, but after promotion, being able to go Draco Knight is nice, because it gives them flyer mobility, really good class bases, ability to use Iron Axes for Open Triangle if they need to, a lot of flexibility there, so I really value that. And I think that's better than Barst's mid-game. If you're like warp skipping, I think these guys are better, because the mobility comes in handy more often than the extra combat. Whereas if you're playing through the game kind of slowly and trying to kill everything, route the chapters before you seize, then someone like Barst might be better, because you're gonna go a little slower anyway, but then it's more useful to have better combat to be able to route those enemies more effectively. So it kind of depends on, I guess, your playstyle. Castor in this game might be one of his worst one. I do like that you can forge iron bows in this game for like really heavy flyer effectiveness, and that is helpful for bow units sometimes. There's not that many powerful flying enemies in the early game anyway, and you don't really have room to forge until like chapter 7, where you fight like Minerva and her friends, and there it can be helpful to have bows. But other than that, like Castor just isn't much beyond his early game utility. And this is a game where, again, it's like, okay, so you got archers who are worse than hunters, but then I think horsemen are much worse than snipers. Sure, horsemen have like more mobility, but the sniper combat advantage that I've gone over a couple times now, it still applies in Shadow Dragon. The big advantage to snipers, in my opinion, in this game, is that they get C rank bows upon promotion, no matter what like character you are. So even if you're like Abel, for example, you can reclass the sniper and get C rank bows. It doesn't really apply to units like Castor or Tomas or Gordon, for example. But it is worth noting, I think, and it also puts them close to Parthia, I guess. So I'm not sure what to make of Castor. Like, I like him the best out of all the early game archers options that you have, which I think is basically just him and Gordon, and yet reclassing someone else to archer. Archer has like terrible class bases that are just impossible to grow out of. So I think like long term, for example, I think Gordon is better because the sniper class, whereas Horseman doesn't really offer all that much. Like, there's almost no unit in Fe11 that you want to reclass to Horseman later. Maybe like if you train like Hunter Roger, you might want to take him into Hunter. I guess you could still make him Warrior, though. That would also be viable. I'm not sure. I don't think it's definitely a solid D tier. He's helpful in the early game just to avoid counterattacks with, like, if you gotta hit like a really strong fighter with really high attack, you want to do it with someone like Castor who doesn't take a counterattack, so you can still maybe take one hit on enemy phase. So I think I put him like around where Gordon is. I'm not sure if he's better overall. Long-term unit, Gordon is better. If you're just using him for short-term, which I think is the optimal play most of the time, then Castor is better, but only slightly. Tomas, I think, as much as I liked, surprisingly, like, as much as a pleasant surprise as it was to have Tomas be somewhat good in FE3 and FE1, I don't think I can really argue in his favor for Shadow Dragon. I just think he's, like, yeah, he's 2 levels from Sniper, but in this game you have, like, more better options for that, that require less training, and it's also less valuable to have one in the first place. Like, I know I said it works in favor of Gordon, but Gordon is still D tier, and Tomas, I just don't think there's much of a purpose for him, especially with George so close to being able to use Parthia and everything. I just don't see the point in a level 8 Archer in Chapter 12. I just don't think there's much you can do. And I'm trying to think of like what you could do with him, but like even just saving him is such a hassle. I'm not going to count his recruitment cost against him. Like, I'm not going to count against him that you have to like rush over there to save him from the enemies that are inevitably going to kill everyone but 2 of the prisoners, him and Medea and Boa, and then the 2 armor knights. But I think he goes in D tier, and I think he goes to the bottom of it because he had no early game utility to speak of. Like, honestly, I could see him in here as well for this game. There's also not that many like enemy flyers that you want to kill in an efficient playthrough in this game, so that doesn't help him either. Zane, or Cheney, as he used to be called, I think this is like the biggest example of like how you play and how efficiently you play depends like how good Zane is. If you are warp skipping chapters, then chapters will generally last 1 turn, and Zane needs that turn to transform into another unit, and that means he's effectively useless. Like, he's going to be worse than Tomas, because Tomas can do something on turn 1, generally. Like, he could maybe... Probably not, but you know what I mean, right? But if the chapter lasts more than 1 turn, then Zane is going to be a copy of one of your best, if not your best unit, and he'll be able to use them whenever you like. And every turn that the chapter lasts, that he's transformed, is going to be good for him. There will eventually be a turn where he has to transform again, but then we're talking like turn 4, 5, 6 or something. I forgot exactly what turn it is, but the point remains the same. And if Zane can copy a trained Pala, a trained Harden, Jagan, Sita, Lena, Ballistician, like those are usually the best options, right? Ballistician, Lena, and one of those really good combat units. Then he's just one of the best units in the game. So it really depends on the playstyle. I'm not going to assume every chapter's warp skip, because if it is, it's kind of like, it's not as interesting of a tier list, right? So in the interest of like tier listing, I'm going to assume chapters aren't warp skipped, which means Zane is good. And then the question remains, how good is he? Because he still has to take the first turn off to transform, and you might have to dedicate a healer to him to make sure he's at full health if you want him to do actual 1v1 combat. So that is a bit of a penalty. And of course, he's also around for like a third of the game max. But in that third of the game, he is really good. And I tend to value those units higher than units that are just kind of mediocre. I guess a good example of that would be like Draug, or like a trained Gordon or something, or like Astra or Medea. He's definitely better than those. I would say he's around like this level, roughly. Better than Minerva, I don't know. Better than Pala and Katria. I guess he'd be around their level, if not a bit better. Of course, like Pala and Katria are two of the better late game units once they've been trained. So if I have them, I usually transform Zane into them, because I only have 1 wing spear, so there's not much of a point in having like him copy Sita. Although if Sita has a bunch of stat boosters, then maybe her stats can match Pala and Katria. It depends, I guess. But generally, I think their stats are the better ones to copy for like Draco Knight combat. But being able to copy Ballistician, for example, is so good. As we'll get into when we get to Beck, of course. They have Bantu. They really nerfed Bantu for some reason. I don't know why, because I thought he was a really cool unit. But in FE3, when you transform Bantu, he just stays in a dragon form for a while, and he gets good combat. Like, I believe his durability is good. He doesn't double anything. I think his attack speed is 0, but he hits pretty hard. He doesn't really die on the physical side, and he can like kind of 1v1 ice dragons. I think the way he goes against ice dragons in book 2 is he takes 1 hit from them and he OKOs them in return, which is good enough to be functionally helpful. And then F11 Bantu is just none of that. Like, he gets a lot of defense, but not enough to survive more than 1 round of combat, and in return he has like one somewhat semi-strong inaccurate attack in return. He might just be the worst unit in FE12. I don't know if he's the worst unit in FE11, but I wouldn't be surprised if he is. He might be like slightly better than Rad. I want to check his bases real quick, just to make sure I'm not missing anything. Like his original bases are of course really, really bad. Like, they're below 5 in every stat, but movement and HP. But really his bases are also determined by the Firestone. So let me check those stats real quick. I guess plus 8 strength. So I guess his strength is 10 and his speed is like 8. And then 12 defense. Like, those aren't even like great stats. They're like maybe on par with some pre-promotes, but his growths are some of the worst in the game. So he's never going to get anywhere. He only has 1 range. That's another thing that they nerfed, is like they just took away his 2 range for no reason. Kind of sad. I'm going to put him in F tier, I think. I don't think there's a worse unit. I think Lawrence in this game, I don't even know why he's here, honestly. He could be like a little bit better, I think. As honestly, like he can do some things in a semi-efficient playthrough that I think are a bit overlooked here. So I'm going to put him in E. I think this is a more proper F tier. I'm not sure. Like you can train Rad, I guess, if you really wanted to. I don't really care very much about the super low positions. I just think Lawrence is a bit better than this. Alright, Goto in FE11 is kind of... Like, I used to think he was a complete afterthought that didn't really impact Final Chapter that much, especially if you warp skip it. Then Goto can at least warp, so that's helpful, but you generally don't need another warper, so how useful he is, this depends on, like, do I have enough warpers in the first place? If not, he is useful. If not, he's useless. It's very binary. But when I saw Excelblum play FE11 with this, whole sacrificial tactic, I noticed that Goto was very different. The main usefulness that he had for him was that he could use Swarm, and not just use that Swarm himself, you could also trade it to Lena and use it with her. But that's not really Goto's utility. Like, the fact that he comes with Swarm doesn't matter very much for his utility, but the fact that he can use it and is very good, because then you can take out ballisticians and other long-term threats and kind of stall out the chapter. Like, I think it just used other generics to put them on the fort, block reinforcements, and in the meantime, Goto and Lena could just like swarm every enemy to death, use the hammer to repair the swarm whenever necessary, and I just kind of trivialized the whole chapter. It was pretty cool. That's obviously not the most efficient way to go about it, because it takes like millions of turns. The general efficient clear involves a warp, but it's still helpful. But it's only 1 chapter, and it's only if you don't have Nagi. If you have Nagi in your team, then Goto will not join you. It's never stated why, that's just how it is. And Nagi is, I would say, a fairly important part of a Medea's kill in an efficient playthrough where you go to 24x, but it's not necessary. I've noticed during my Iron Man that training Tiki is actually more reliable than training Goto, or training Nagi and having her hit Medea's, because a trained Tiki will get like a bunch of skill and luck level ups that increase their hit rate over Nagi's, and Medea's is sort of dodgy, so if you're doing like an Iron Man, that hit difference can make a big difference, and it's much easier to train Tiki in 24x and maybe use some like skill books from the secret shop, or maybe some goddess icons, than it is to rely on that. And also in an Iron Man, like you don't want to use Marth for Medea's, because the Marth misses, you get a game over. So what you want to do is hit Medea's with like 2 mana keys in a row, basically, and then I'll risk a game over. Or you can use Marth, I guess. So I'm trying to think like what that makes Goto in all this, because if Nagi's not the most efficient and most reliable route, then it makes Goto a bit better. You can just skip 24x, have Goto in your team, you have an extra warp if you need one for some more flexibility. He's forced into the room that Marth also starts in, which I think is also the room where you would like at least 1 boss killer to be in. You need like a warp to kill the Manakete in front of Medea's. It's kind of tricky to 1-round, but I think you can do it with like Wormslayer Sita with the right amount of speed. Then you need a warper to go to Medea's and fight him the first time. And then you probably need to finish him off, because you probably didn't crit with your Manakete, so you need like 2 hits to kill him. So you need to warp in someone else. So you need like boss killer, and Manakete killer. So like 3 warps. So Goto might be one of those. So I'll just put him like in the bottom of C, I guess. It's not great utility that he has, but I think it's more than one of the units do in the early game. So Goto being better than Marth is kind of funny in a way, because Marth is the most available unit in the entire game, and Goto manages to be better, despite being only around for 1 chapter. But with this, it's all about the value and how much do you value availability, because if you value it higher, then Goto gets lower, and vice versa. Alright, Beck, one of my favorite units. I think it's easy to see that he just goes straight where Jake is. I think he's like slightly better. Depends on like how much you value his slight statistical edge over Jake versus Jake's high availability. But there's no question, I think, that either of these are S tier units. So I probably said this about Jake a while ago, but it's fun to talk about these units because they're so stupidly strong. Players should almost never have access to 1 to 10 range. I just talked about how good Goto with Swarm is, and Ballisticians are just that on overdrive, because they have like effective weapons. They have Arrow Spate and Thunderbolts to kill Flyers and Ballisticians respectively, and you can forge those weapons to be able to one-hit KO these enemies. So you can get in spots late game where you just never have to actually engage an enemy. You can just shoot them from distance with these 2, and then maybe a Zane transformed into one of them, and you just never have to fight them. And you also get the Star Sphere to prevent their weapons from depleting if you want to. So if you trade that around, you can use them even more often and makes forging even more cost effective. You can use this hammer to repair them if they do get low, like after you get the Star Sphere, after you lose the Star Sphere, if that happens to you. Like if you're getting the Falchion, all these things you can do with them from 3 to 10 range. Really good in chapters where you fight enemies that are just too strong to handle, which happens quite a lot. Like magical enemies, they sometimes just do too much damage or they have too much crit with like Thoron. You have enemies with Swarm that you can get rid of at a distance. You can kill bosses with them that are too dangerous. Getting rid of enemy ballisticians is really useful because they just threaten so much of a range. Like in chapter 20, the Kamut chapter, killing a ballistician is just so much easier in your auto units. I can see why they took these guys away in FE3, but I really regret it. And I'm really glad that they returned for Shadow Dragon at least to hit people at 3 to 10 range. And yeah, this is Beck at his best. Like remember how bad he was in FE1 and how not around he was in FE3? And this is peak Beck. This is really, really good. FE12, they unfortunately took away his ballisticians because they ran out of arrows or oil or something. So they just made him a generic horseman. But in this game, you can really enjoy him in his prime, killing enemies from all over the place. Really, really solid units. It doesn't really matter that much that he's only around for half the game. He is completely fantastic. It's amazing how good Beck is. Now, finally, there's Norn, who is hard to rate for higher difficulties because she doesn't exist there. She's only around in FE11 normal mode, and only if you sacked, I think, 2 or more units. So if you sack like Gordon and Abel or something, a lot of people suggest sacking Jagan. Don't sack Jagan. It's not a good idea. Unless you really don't like him. In that case, go nuts. But wouldn't recommend it to anyone. But when you have Norn, she's an archer. She's just like Gordon. I don't think her bases are all that different. Female archer doesn't have much better bases than male one, I don't believe. I'm going to compare real quick, but I think I already said about Gordon, like his early game utility is nice. Being able to use a steel bow to chip at range is cool, but it doesn't really do a whole lot beyond like chapter 3 or 4. Norn has 1 more speed and 1 less strength, so pretty equivalent units. She has a higher strength growth though, amusingly. She has 25 strength to Gordon's 20. She also has much better speed growth at 55 compared to Gordon's 35. Make of that what you will. If you use like, there's like a patch that lets you play the guiding chapters and use with characters like Frey and Norn outside of normal mode. I'll just kind of assume that that exists and that she can be rated in like her hard 5 utility. Basically the same unit as Gordon. I don't think there's a big difference. The higher speed growth is nice though. I think that's ultimately what edges her out because they should be available for the same amount of time in that patch. So having 1 more base speed and having 20% more growth should make her able to double a bit more reliably. I know that Gordon, eventually when he promotes to Sniper, he will probably have the speed to not get doubled at the very least and maybe double some enemies. So my hope is that Norn can get to the point where she actually doubles enemies. That's my hope for her, and that's what make her better than Gordon. Maybe even better than Castor long term. But honestly, neither of these are really worth using long term, and neither is Castor. So there you have it. There's FE11 Shadow Dragon and FE3 Book 1 and 2 summarized into 1 tier list. We have some characters left though. I would say we have like half, not half the cast, like a little less the cast left of Shadow Dragon, but hopefully we caught up a little bit. Next edition, we'll go over the FE12 units. They will be the same units roughly, but in the context of FE12. And then that will be the end of the Arcanea special. And we can get back to submitting any characters you want. But hopefully we caught up a bit on Arcanea. And I hope you enjoyed like discussing the little nuances and differences between FE1, FE3, and FE11, FE12 whenever they existed. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes the units are just kind of similar. But I think it's interesting to see how the game grows mechanically. And you can see that really well when you keep all these variables like map design and enemy classes the same. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks to my Patreons for submitting units and supporting me all this time. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you all next time. Peace out. Goodbye.